Welcome, everybody, to our October Ruby Lecture. Jane Ruby was a very well-loved history professor here at Wheaton for many, many years. She served as provost for several years as well. And so it's the provost's honor to get to introduce the Ruby lecturers to the Wheaton community. I want to welcome back some of our alums who are here at the start of our homecoming weekend, and all of you, students, faculty, friends, staff, who are here for this wonderful occasion. I met Michael Harper the same year I met Jane Ruby when I came to teach at Brown University, and I was teasing Indira and a couple of other people about how long ago that was. I will now confess it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And I cherished my friendship with Jane Ruby, who we lost about 10 years ago. And I am sorry that she's not here to enjoy this. I know she would get a big kick out of it. It's her kind of thing. And I cherish especially now my continuing friendship with Michael Harper, who is for me the embodiment of the poet. Poetry is, in my life, the strongest, most powerful, motivating art I can imagine. And I won't try to wax rhapsodical when we've got a real poet here to do it in ways that are much more interesting to you. But I'll say a few things about Michael Harper and then just let him do his poetry thing. Michael Harper is university professor of English at Brown University, where he has taught since before I arrived, 1970. He is also the first poet laureate of Rhode Island, a term that he held from 1988 to 93. In 1991, he was visiting scholar at large for Phi Beta Kappa, visited 9 campuses on behalf of that organization. He's published 10 books of poetry, 2 of which were nominated for the National Book Award, Dear John, Dear Coltrane, and Images of Ken, New and Selected Poems. Images of Ken won the Melville-Cane Award from the Poetry Society of America. History is Your Own Heartbeat, another book of poems, won the Black Academy of Arts and Sciences Award for Poetry. He's edited the collected poems of Sterling Brown, which he selected for the National Poetry Series. He's co-editor of Chant of Saints, an anthology of African American art, writing, and scholarship. Also co-editor of the Ralph Ellison special issue of the Carleton Miscellany. He was guest editor of a special issue on Robert Hayden for Obsidian, and those were early in his career. He has done an enormous amount since. More wonderful anthologies, including the Vintage Anthology, from which I believe he's going to read tonight, and lots more wonderful books of poems. And one thing that you don't get in these official biographies is that Michael Harper is a great mentor to generations of creative writers, students and professionals, and a great friend to all of us. I am just honored and delighted to welcome Michael S. Harper to Wheaton College.
I'm known as a carpetbagger, so I have my various saddlebags. I'm lucky enough to have had some good teachers, good mentors early in my life, beginning with my parents, my mother and father. And my mother taught me how to read even before I went to school. And one of the things that I love about campuses like this, for about 1975 to 78, I lived in Taunton, Massachusetts, which is right down the road. And I was there on the Mass Council on the Arts, and did my tour duty, so to speak. And I will never forget going to the mailbox on Tremont Street and getting a letter from the United States Senate, Senator Ed Brooke, congratulating me for being the recipient of a National Endowment to the Arts Award. And I thought to myself, I finally made it, Senator Ed Brooke, So, of course, things don't end. A few years ago, I would say about 3, I get a call in my office at Brown from Senator Ed Brooke saying that he would like to speak to me privately, and left a number, 202, meaning the area code from Washington, D.C. And he had a son who was 18 or 19 years old, freshman at Brown, who wanted to write. And he says, I don't want my son under any circumstances to know that I've called you. In fact, he says, I only want you to know about this. I don't want you to do anything. So I thought to myself, the role of a parent never changes. Always looking out for their kids, and kids leave home, and you want somebody to look after them. Now, this book, the Vintage Book of African American Poetry, is $14, and it's only in paperback. It's what they call a vintage original. And I'm going to read 3 or 4 poems from this book to give you a sense of who my ancestors were, the people that made me who I am from a literary point of view. Now, I'm lucky because I knew these people when they were full of spunk, and they're all deceased now. And I find that I love them even more now. And I'm not talking about nostalgia, I'm talking about the fact that they helped me in ways that at the time I didn't even know, So I'm going to begin with Bob Hayden, Mr. Robert Hayden, who wrote a wonderful poem entitled October. Now, his daughter, whose name is Maya, M-A-I-A, lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And her birthday is the 5th of October. And I always begin any class I'm teaching, the first date in October, I read this poem. It's in 4 parts. And Bob Hayden told me, the convention of this poem, Michael, is that I wanted to write a poem about the change of seasons without mentioning the colors. But Hayden, who was a symbolic poet in the highest sense, was never only talking about something simple, like the change of season. Generally speaking, he's talking about the spiritual state of us, So the poem is in 4 parts. October. October, its plangency, its glow, as of words in the poet's mind, as of God in the saints. I wept for your mother in her pain, wept in my joy when you were born, Maya, that October morning. We named you for a star-like poem sang. I write this for your birthday and say I love you. And say October, like the phoenix sings you. This chiming and tolling of lion and phoenix and chimera colors. This huntsman's horn, sounding mort for quarry, fleeing through mirrors of burning into deathless dying. Part 4. Rock weight of surprising snow, crush the October trees, broke branches that, crashing, set the snow on fire. So for your Oktoberfest, that's Bob Hayden. The person that gave me my career is a person named Gwendolyn Brooks. She chose my book out of the slush pile in 1969. There were 3 judges, Robert Penn Warren, Denise Levertov, and Gwendolyn Brooks. And she wrote me a letter. Dear Michael S. Harper, you were my clear winner in capitals. So when my students get low, I say you should go home and write yourself a letter. And then mail it to yourself. Register it so you don't have to open it, because after all, you mailed it to yourself. And just keep it for bad days, you know, because there will be some. So I'm going to read this fabulous poem, which everybody knows, which people call a ballad. Now, you know, it's a hard thing to write a ballad in 8 lines. You know, you have to be a genius. But she, of course, was one. And I'll read it like she reads it. We real cool, the pool player, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. Now, the fact that that's a ballad means that you have to study it. Read it lots of times, commit it to memory, walk around, humming it to yourself, you know, when you're not thinking about anything else. When I was in Latvia, I was asked to come to I guess this was like a technical school, pretty much like, you know, 10th grader. And nobody wanted to go. I was traveling with some Americans, and they said, you know, I'd rather sightsee or drink or whatever. So this was a dialogue that had been established by Bill Clinton and Yeltsin on democratic institutions. So I walk into this room, and a young person about 14 stands up and recites to me in perfect English. We're in Latvia. That's right at the Arctic Circle. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. So I answer her with the poem. It is late at night and still I am losing, but still I am steady and unaccusing. Poem rhymes. As long as the Declaration, large D, guards my right to be equal in number of cards, it's nothing to me who runs a dive. Let's have a look at another 5. The look on that child's face was worth the trip. So that's one of the reasons why you get on planes and go to foreign countries and find out what is there waiting for you, because you don't know. So a friend of mine and a friend of Lawrence Sykes and Barbara Sykes, who were in the audience, wrote a very fine poem called 26 Ways of Looking at a Black Man. And this echoing 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Bird by Wallace Stevens. And I'm just going to read you section 19. There is a sorrow of black men lost in cities. But who can conceive of cities lost in a black man? The other person that I'm thinking about is a person that doesn't get much play nowadays because most people don't know she's a poet. But she was a student of mine who comes from Lexington, Kentucky, and she used to come and sit in my office. And she would treat me like I was the oracle at Delphi, you know. She would sit there silently, and I would spiel for hours on end. And finally, I got tired of it. So I said to her, "What have you been doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm listening to a lot of Billie Holiday." I said, Go write me a poem on that. She says, I don't write poetry. I said, I didn't ask you that. So 2 days later, she slipped this poem underneath my door. It's called Deep Song for B.H., Billie Holiday. The blues calling my name. She is singing a deep song. She is singing a deep song. I am human. He calls me crazy. He says, you must be crazy. I say, yes, I'm crazy. He sits with his knees apart. His fly is broken. She is singing a deep song. He smiles. She is singing a deep song. Yes, I'm crazy. I care about you. I care. I care about you. I care. He lifts his eyebrows. The blues is calling my name. I tell him he'd better do something about his fly. He says something softly. He says something so softly that I can't even hear him. He is a dark man. Sometimes he is a good dark man. Sometimes he is a bad dark man. I love him. So, when she wrote this poem, I just put it in a book I was editing and didn't ask permission because I knew she would have said no. So when the poem was published in a book, they sent her a copy and they also sent her a royalty check. So she was furious. She says, you published my poem without my permission. I said, yeah, no, I'm sorry. She says, well, why would you do that? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I called your mother, whose name was Lucille Jones. And the first thing your mother said was, you know, Michael Harper, I write poetry too. Shall I send you something? So I figured that since I'd gotten permission from your mother, and you were going to cash that check, I was going to be forgiven. So she said to me, only this time. Only this time. Now, some of you know who Rita Dove is. She wrote a poem for me called Canary. It's only 13 lines. Billie Holiday's burned voice had as many shadows as lights. A mournful candelabra against a sleek piano. The gardenia, her signature, under that ruined face. Now you're cooking, drummer to bass, magic spoon, magic needle. Take all day if you have to, with your mirror and your bracelet of song. Fact is, the invention of women under siege has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. If you can't be free, be a mystery. If you can't be free, be a mystery. So those are people who help me along. And every now and then, you need a push from somebody. And I had a few. Now my daughter, I rarely get a chance to embarrass my daughter, who is a writer in her own mind, and one who I dearly love. When she was a child, 7 years old or so, I instructed her to write to Ralph Ellison, author of Invisible Man. And we had a festival on campus when Rachel was 7. So she writes this letter to Ralph Ellison saying happy birthday. And Ralph Ellison writes back, Dear Rachel, I am flying like a bird because I am so delighted with your birthday greeting. Today I saw a pair of beautiful red-tailed hawks flying over the Hudson River below our window. And I told them that on their way north, they should tell all the birds that you have announced that spring is on its way. See you soon. Thanks for thinking of me. And we hope you are well and happy. Sincerely, Ralph Ellison. Miss Rachel Harper, Cara Papa. So when I received this, of course, I suppressed it because I'm an archival person, and I knew when she grew up it would be important to her. And it has been. So I got a book in the mail just recently, and it's called Mending the World. And they asked for a blurb of some sort. Stories of family by contemporary black writers. And I think to myself, And I look in the table of contents, and there's my daughter. The Myth of Music by Rachel M. Harper. I said, there's only one Rachel M. Harper. And then I noticed, for my father. So, embarrassment being what it is for her, I'm going to read it. The Myth of Music. If music can be passed on, like brown eyes or a strong left hook, this melody is my inheritance. Lineage traced through a title track, displayed on an album cover, that you pin to the wall as art. Oral history taught on a record player, the lessons sealed into the grooves like fact. This is the only myth I know. I sit on the hardwood floors of a damp November, my brother dealing cards from an incomplete deck. And I don't realize that this moment is the definition of family. Collective memory cut in rough textured tones. The voice of a horn so familiar. I don't know I'm listening. Don't know I'm singing. A child's improvisation of giant steps or impressions. Songs without lyrics can still be sung. In 6 months, when my mother is 2,000 miles away, deciding if she wants to come home, I will have forgotten this moment, the security of her footsteps, the warmth of a radiator on my back, and you present in the sound of typing your own accompaniment, multiphonics disguised as chords in a distant room. Speakers set on high to fill the whole house with your spirit, your call as a declaration of love. But the music will remain. The timeless notes of jazz, too personal to play out loud, stay locked in the rhythm of my childhood. Memories fading, like the words of a lullaby, come to life in a saxophone's blow. They lie when they say music is universal. This is my song. The notes like fingerprints, so delicate as breath. I will not share this air with anyone but you. Now, you know, I've had the blessing of having 3 children. They're all themselves. And they're all artistic. They all have their own personality. And miraculously, they all look like me in one way or another. And when they were growing up on the Brown University campus, they always wanted to be anonymous. They said, "Dad, everybody's staring at us." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "Everybody knows who we are." I said, "You know, when you're given a choice between being nobody and being somebody, you better choose somebody." You know. I said, "Can you imagine these secretaries watching you kids walk around and going into, ice skating or whatever you're doing? And you don't have to walk up and say, 'I'm Professor Harper's daughter.' They say, 'There goes Harper's kid.' That's the way it is to be on campus. When you use the library and when you go to the Athenaeum for the children's section. I was a member of the Athenaeum because I knew my kids had to do their homework and I wanted them to go to the library and read books. And I made it possible for them to care about what had been done for me. And my mother had taught me the 1001 Nights. And I don't remember this, but she does. She would say, "You used to call your sister Scheherazade." So the book must have had an effect on me. And since I was a bad boy, which is to say, one who rode the subways from 5 to 8 without my parents' permission, taking all the Jewish holidays I could find to go to Staten Island and the Bronx, you know. I felt that when they finally caught me, and I ran into my grandmother and my father on the same day, and my father was cool. He acted like he didn't see me. You know. He was going to work. I was getting off. So I said, well, I'm caught now. I might as well keep riding, you know. So I got back on. And I got down to Eastern Parkway, and I changed planes, and I heard this tap on the window. My grandmother. Waving to me. So I knew freedom was over. And it was. You know. That's what I mean. I was kind of precocious, and, you know, I had ridden for 3 years without them knowing. That was a pretty good effort. So, I just don't want you to think I'm an angel just because I'm an academic professor. Now I'm going to read you a poem or two by people I care about a lot. My son, my middle boy, he's 33, and when he was about 7, I was living in Taunton, the very Taunton that I mentioned to you earlier. And I was rushing home in my car. And I pull up in the driveway. And there is my daughter, 4 years old, sitting buck naked, with all of the clothes from the dryer and a great big blanket, playing like she's Huckleberry Finn on the porch. I was not a happy camper. So I sweep her up in my arms and take her up to the bedroom. And I guess I was yelling and screaming. I wasn't going to do anything, but I was putting on a good show. And I was yelling and screaming at her, telling her what I was going to do to her. And put her on a bed upstairs, and my son slipped in between us. And he said to me, Dad, Rachel's such a little girl. If you're going to whip anybody, whip me. So, of course, I shamefully crept down to my car, got in it, and went back to my office before anybody found out that I was a homicidal maniac in my own house. You know, what are you doing to your kids? So later on, when he was grown, this boy, I wrote this poem for him, and it's written in couplets. And he hates this title. How to Forgive the Father Who Screams at His Son. He says, Dad, you ought to change that title. He says, you never screamed at me. You never raised your... I said, yes, I did. You know. Oh, yeah, I'm not an angel. So here's the poem. Fear and more than fear, how delicate the wings one needs for flight. It isn't want but need. The ancients reminded us about the wax. Motown the fair. Dancing with no tact for money. To live in this world, you must have time and money. The hard currency of efforts. This is not job talk. Jonathan could not stand a raised voice. Jonathan was my brother. Don't holler at me, you make me nervous, was his refrain. I heard my siblings chortle in their tongues in sleep, caressing one another in nightmare. I learned their speech. You have a hero's name, 2 names, whose increments salute the void, and I will not permit a fall from grace. Of course you must find it for yourself, the space for aerial delights, the fragrance of women who ascend. They are the compliments of the world. I saw you born near noon in roses. I saw your perfect teeth. So I know the warrior in this domain. And elsewhere, those attributes that reign. This is a whisper that you hear at rest when you sojourned at inner flight upon my breast. The hardest thing to do is tell your kid you love them. And you can't do that by just saying it. You got to do it by demonstration. So I tried to do that as best I could. My sister, who was my baby sister, the one that I used to call Scheherazade, lives in Los Angeles. And she's a bully of the first order. Unbelievable. And when I was a little boy, I must have been about 6, my mother came down the stairs one day, and she was taking care of her mother, who was dying of a series of strokes, and she handed my sister to me. And she says, "You got to help me." And my sister always grew up saying the same thing. I had 3 parents, my mother, my father, and my oldest brother. You know, meaning me. So I was sitting down one day, and along came her birthday. And I had not sent her a card. So I wrote her this poem so I could fax it to her and get it under the wire, you know. And what caused it was, I was listening to the radio, and one of my favorite compositions that I heard as a boy by Edvard Grieg came on the radio. And I began to think about things. And next thing you know, the poem came. So it begins with me on a train in Bergen, Norway, where I had gone, which is the end of the line in Norway. And it's called the journey motif in my sister's birthday song. I was once in Bergen, Norway, after a long train ride ferry, and stayed alone at the terminus, dining alone with Margot, royal as the eyes of Elizabeth Taylor, who played tennis with me at her club when I was a boy. Oslo very slow, Norwegians resisting the Germans like no other Europeans, their eyes lighter than snow. Grieg played his concerto in A minor for my mother when I was a boy. And I sang it to my sister, Catherine, born during the war. My mother put her into my arms as she attended her own mother in successive strokes, written off by every doctor but my mother, who worked with ESP on the beloved hearing her children speak to one another in their sleep, in separate rooms, terraces of light in the adult years, when innocence was elsewhere. Trains from then on were not significant journeys elsewhere, but music composed in grief. And I saw hers at the piano she had bought for my father, who hated playing as a boy, practice and agony in Catskill, in an all-white town with no future he could see until he met her. So I speak to you on your birthday, 11 years to the cadence of lucky numbers. You should have had to play along with your good looks, your witticisms, your truth of 3 parents, me and the Count, and one soulmate whom you talk to and sleepwalk, our lovely brother Jonathan at Terminus. My brother got killed in a motorcycle accident when he was 36. So my sister and I talk across the void of what was once him. And we don't talk about it, but that's the void that's left of the 3 of us. And I want to find something that is a little lighter in tone. I'll do this one. There was a great bass player named Ray Brown, played for many years with Oscar Peterson. And he was once married to Ella Fitzgerald. If you don't know who Ella Fitzgerald is, I pity you. I can't do anything about that, you know. A tisket, a tasket, and all that rest of it. She sang everything. So I was listening to the radio, and Ray Brown is being interviewed. And he starts to talk about young musicians and what they have to learn. So that's what the poem's about, if you don't force it. He's talking about interpolations, riffs that come in the midst of action, responding to the line, accommodating the blues, and not neglecting the melody, refusing to smother beauty with too many chords. To show off is to bungle the melody with chordal blocks, not building anything to your baby. Hiding the melody like only the young can do. Lester Young would watch the dancers moving into his vernaculars, with rhythms augmenting the melody. Herschel would set the pace. Prez would follow. Count would comp time. As though you could improve on stride piano. Ben Webster could do stride. When you get possessed with too many wild chords, tie your left hand behind your back. Then play the melody with one finger on your right hand. Put that melody on your heart. So I just stole it from him. You know, he was talking about it. I just wrote it down. He didn't care, you know. Musicians don't care. They live in the immediate. And they want you to buy their records. But they don't want to repeat themselves. They play in the moment of performance. That's what they care about. And they need one another because they respond to one another as they're playing in a particular moment. Well, a poet can't do that, you know. First of all, if you publish everything you write on first draft, you will look like a fool, you know. So you have to not do that. You have to fight against that. And you have to fight against something that everybody thinks is wonderful called inspiration. You got to forget that. You know, the last person that was inspired was Coleridge when he was high on something. So don't do that, you know. Don't try and get high and then write something, because it's going to be dribble. I'm here to tell you. At the same time, you know, you have to fool yourself into thinking that there's an easy way. And I'm here to tell you there's no easy way. You just have to make your mistakes and fall on your face and be silly. And read a lot of Keats. You know, Keats will help. Keats is a lot better poet than you are. And he died, you know, when he was 25, you know. So you're not going to be able to rival him. And stop fooling yourself into thinking that you're going to be able to do it, because you're not. You know, this is called modesty. You become modest. And I recommend it. I recommend modesty. I was in Estonia, the country, and we were allowed to visit the president, whose name is President Meri, M-E-R-I. And he invited us into his office. There were about 6 of us, all Americans. And I had just come in from Helsinki on the tiniest boat you've ever seen. Not the big ferry that went down Estonia, but a little tiny little boat. And the Russians had just left. They were gone like 2 weeks. And you turn on the TV in a hotel room, and my hotel room was looking right out on that ferry, that huge ferry called Estonia. And of course, there's nothing but pornography. I mean, good pornography. But you know, there's a bad thing about pornography. Let me tell you what it is. You're interested now, huh? I woke you up. Pornography is described by me as the morbid preoccupation with other people's lives as a substitute for your own, you know. So if you have lascivious thoughts, go find somebody. You know, that's the secret. It's not to look at somebody on a television screen. First of all, you're not that good looking. Second of all, you are not that acrobatic. The third part is, you know, if you don't have an appreciation for comedy, you know, and looking at pornography, don't watch it, because it's likely to make you blue. All of that, you know. So they had about 58 channels of that. So I said to myself, you better try and write something, man, you know. You'll never be in Estonia again, so I wrote this. It's called Aborigines, parentheses, Estonia. And the epigraph is from Czesław Miłosz, the great Polish poet, who said, Language is the only homeland. Aborigines, Estonia. In a special audience with President Mary, who has 8 languages under his many belts, his secretaries in the cold palace protected by guards without bullets in their ancient guns, and after exchange, foreign and domestic, I read a poem of welcome to him who could have gone to graduate school in America, but was sent to Siberia instead. And I wait for the silence, which is a bookman's special pleading, and ask him where on the map, which is as ancient as his ancestors, where was that town he was sent to? The globe rests on his writing table, but he goes for his books, translated in several languages, for a handwritten inscription from his father, who was a scholar writer in his own right, and wrote poetry in Estonia, a poetry unsaid in every privacy since 1917. He points to the outpost, then casting a gaze across the Bering Sea, points to Alaska and beyond. The only thing that kept me alive in that dreadful time was the thought of the Aborigines. This could be Indians, surely, the Inuit, who had no written language, but sing their songs to acceptance in tones so sweet, even blubber, succulent in the worst winters, answers back, as every spirit of the world talks back in the song of the singer. But he does not mean them. He means, it is clear, for the time he takes to make his prepared entrance to the map. He means writers, Americans, who have taken his time from affairs, and he welcomes this time away from disaster. Only a little later, the whole world comes alive in the estimates of hatch and water in the ferry, named for a free country. Some 900 passengers and crew went down and out, and we sent messages to President Mary about bad times, disastrous times, and the nuanced poetry lost with these souls. I photographed the Estonia from my hotel perch, anchored in a hail of sunlight, a beam-ridden morning that is not the character of the sea. And when we visited Uswa and stood before Gustavus Adolphus and thought of Jesus in the old world, we knew the cadence of this song, Aborigines, beginners at the salt lick of citizenship, paid for in the extreme, and free for the very asking, frost-driven on a map in Siberia. Now, I'm being cautioned not to go on too long, so I'll read 2 more and then let you out of here. Out of here means to the reception. I am lucky enough to have had lots of subject matter. And I had a friend of mine who was the secretary of the English department. And her name was Ruth Oppenheim, and she got ready to retire. And I said to myself, I got to write her something. So I just sat down and wrote a poem. I gave it to her. I didn't think any more about it. So she kept it, as a dutiful secretary does, when some blowhard writes her a poem. She didn't say, Professor Harper, I don't understand this poem. She didn't say that. But she had been a child of 10 during that historic time called Kristallnacht, 1938. And I had remembered this and had thought about all of the things that she knew and all of the things that she sat upon. So if the poem sounds strange, I was in Atlanta or in Decatur, which is right next door, at a place called Agnes Scott College, and the guy who was introducing me was a medievalist from Brown. And he called me a Keatsian poet, which is the greatest compliment you can get when somebody calls you a Keatsian poet. And he mentioned the veil of soul making, which is an excerpt from Keats's letters. Now, Keats wrote a lot of letters, and when you get real low and you think that life is impossible, an email has failed you, you can go read those letters. And if you're a young woman, you can say to yourself, I wish somebody write me a letter like this. You know, Keats wrote a lot of them. And the reason why is because he was a genius, and because he knew a great deal about the world, and he knew it early. You know, he was dead by 25. So this man introduced me as the veil of soul making. I was a poet in the Keatsian tradition. And that's where the title comes from. The Ghost of Soul Making comes from Keats. And the poem is for Ruth Oppenheim, and I'll just read it. It's got 2 epigraphs. On that day it was decreed, who shall live and who shall die? Yom Kippur prayer. And the other, art in the ultimate always celebrates the victory. The ghost appears in the dark of winter, sometimes in the light of summer, in the light of spring, confronts you behind the half door in the first shock of morning, often after hours, with bad memories to stunt your day, winds in twilight, winds in the umbrella of trees. He stands outside the locked doors, rain or shine. He constructs the stunt work of allegiances in the form of students, in the form of the half measure of blankets. He comes to parade rest in the itch of frost on the maple, on the cherry caught in the open field of artillery. He remembers the battlefields of the democratic order. He marks each accent through the gates of the orchard, singing in the cadences of books. You remember books burned, a shattering of crystals, prayers for now and in the afterlife, Germany of the northern lights of Kristallnacht, the ashes of synagogues. The ghost turns to your mother as if he believed in penance, in wages earned. In truth places these flowers you have brought with your own hands, irises certainly, and the Dalmatian rose, whose fragrances calms every hunger in religious feast or fast. Into her hands, these blossoms, her fragrant palms. There is no wedding ring in the life of ghosts, no sacred asp on the wrist in imperial cool, but there is a bowl on the reception table, offerings of Swiss black licorice. On good days, the bowl would entice the dream of husband, children, and grandchildren. On good days, one could build a synagogue in one's own city. Call it city of testimony, conscious city of words. In this precinct made of male and female, the ghost commences. The ghost disappears. What of the lady in the half-light of the Enlightenment? Tact and a few scarves, a small indulgence for a frugal woman, loyalty learned in the lost records of intricate relations, how to remember, how to forget the priceless injuries on a steno tablet in the tenured cabinets of the files. At birth and before, the ghost taught understanding that no history is fully a record. For the food we will eat is never sour on the tongue, lethal or not, as a defenseless scapegoat. The tongue turned over, as compost is turned over, to sainthood, which makes the palate sing. These are jewels in the service of others. This is her song. She reaps the great reward of praise where answers do not answer, when the self, unleashed from the delicate bottle, wafts over the trees at sunrise and forgives the dusk. Now, I would like to end on Bessie Smith. I was a bad boy. Listening to her records when I was a child. My parents would leave the house and I'd put the record player on and I'd be listening to My House Fell Down and I Can't Live There No More. And then my mother would come back and I'd be humming these tunes. And she'd say, "What's that you humming?" And I said, "Oh, something I heard on the radio, Mama." And she said, "Sounds like Bessie Smith to me," you know. Just in case you don't know this, I'll just tell you an obvious truism. Parents are smarter than kids. They're always smarter than you are. And when you lie, they know you're lying, you know. And they are amused by it, if you're good. I was good. But I was still lying, you know. I was saying, "No, Mama, I ain't listening to that." And I was really wanting to say to her, "Well, why do you buy these records if you don't want me to listen to them?" You know, and the answer to that is they wanted a private life. And I wouldn't let them have one. I was a typical kid in their business and whatever else. And every now and then my parents would dress up. My mother would make a gown. And they'd go up to Harlem and they'd go downtown to Brooklyn to the Comas. And I would see my parents for the first time as young people. They were kind of transformed in front of me. They were in their 30s, you know. I thought they were old. What did I know? My mother would be making this gown, and they'd go down, they'd stay up all night. And I'd fall asleep in the chair, waiting for them to get home. You know, but they had a lot of fun. And of course they were dancing to the wonderful music, Count Basie, you know, Duke Ellington, so on. All right, so what's the point? The point is that Bessie Smith was called the Empress of the Blues. And she sang a song about the Mississippi flood of 1927. And then I went and stood up on some high and lonesome hill and looked down on the place where I used to live. Thunder and lightning and the rain began to roll. Thousands of people ain't got no place to go. Then I went and stood up on some high and lonesome hill and looked down on the place where I used to live. Nothing sentimental in any of that. Which is why I loved it. So when I got to be a grown-up, I said to myself, when I am a real poet, I'll be able to write a poem for her. And I stole the refrain line from a popular song. I changed the lineation. But I'll just tell you I stole it. The best poetry is stolen. You know, just know what to steal. You know, if you're going to be a thief, steal something that's worth stealing. You know. As Sterling Brown used to say, diamonds a song. Diamonds a song. He's talking about Ma Rainey. So this is Last Affair, Bessie's Blues Song. And since poets are always tricky, the first line of the poem is the medical term of the tearing away of the arm from the torso of the body. If you all were surgeons, you would know what the word meant. And since I'm trying to show off, I put that in there. You know. And people write to me. They write to me from Belgium and places like that. And they say, by the way, in the first line of so-and-so. And of course I play games. I say, Dante, eighth circle of hell. You know, it's called Wild Goose Chase. It's called Good Reasons for Real Ones. It's called a lie. You know. This is what happens when you read T.S. Eliot. You know, and various other people. I mean, you get to lying about everything. You know, you can't tell the truth. So I teach my students, when you come to a situation where the answer is, I don't know, say that. Because it's as good as lying, certainly. Well, I don't know where the lying came from. You know, which is a good thing to know. So Bessie Smith, who was dead before I was born, was always important to me. And it was important to me that I read a poem for her, which is a ballad, and which held up as a poem. And one day, a student of mine who was in Virginia somewhere went to the Washington Post and clipped out a review that Rita Dove had written, and she quoted this poem. She says, "This is the most important poem on the subject of a musician that I have ever read." Now, this is Rita Dove saying this. So I'm thinking, do I owe her for anything? I didn't know what when people praise you, it makes you nervous, you know. It makes you nervous. You know, I don't like to be praised. you know. So when people say he's a Keatsian poet, I know that's a lie. You know, I'm not John Keats. But I like it, though. I like nightingales. I like all that, you know. All right. Now listen, afterwards, if anybody wants to ask me a question, you know, feel free, but there's no question and answer period in my deliveries, okay? So it takes me a little while to calm down. And I've got people in the audience who I love dearly. Larry and Barbara Sykes. Barbara Sykes used to write the lyrics of songs to me when I was an adolescent. She would just write them out, send them to me. You know, I was so, what is the word? I was so stunned by the move away from everything I knew, including the house I was born in, and all the neighbors and all the relatives and whatever, to a place where I thought was hell, even though it was Los Angeles. They had palm trees on the street and all that. But I thought it was hell, you know. It took me years to recover. And friends of mine say, well, that's what made you a poet. You had to have a little trouble in your life. And I said, that much trouble? You know, take me all the way to L.A. My parents, you know, were righteously people who were trying to save me from gang fighting. That's what they were trying to do. As if there are no gangs in L.A. You know, it's ridiculous. But I understand why they did what they did. They were trying to save us, you know. I didn't feel menaced by heroin, you know, fights in the park and all the rest of it. But I was dumb also. I was stupid, you know. I was also smart. I got on the flag squad. You know what the flag squad is? You know, when they say dun 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 dun, say nobody wants to hear that. But that allowed me to get out of the school, really. So I get away from all that confrontation outside. And the high school, the junior high school I went to, or the grammar school I went to, is called PS 25. And every now and then they have specials on Jim Lehrer and those students who volunteer to teach for as long as they can stand it, and they go to PS 25. That's the school that I went to. You know, I had no idea it was a homicidal place, but apparently it is. You know, it was just home to me. And my aunt lived across the street. So I would come out of school, I'd come across the street, and my aunt, who taught the Children of Murder Incorporated, you know who they are. There were two guys sitting in a huge car, one a cop and one a fireman, saying to Mrs. Ford, who was my aunt, who was about 5'2", you know, just absolutely walking around with a cane, whipping them into shape so they could be good citizens. So I had some good ethical training at home. And they allowed me to listen to the music, too. So here's the poem. Last Affair, Bessie's Blues Song. Disarticulated, arm torn out. Large veins cross her shoulder intact. Her tourniquet, her blood, in all white big bands. Can't you see what love and heartache's done to me? I'm not the same as I used to be. This is my last affair. Mail truck or parked car in the fast lane. Afloat at 43 on a Mississippi road. 200-pound muscle on her ham bone. Another nigger dead before noon. Can't you see what love and heartache's done to me? I'm not the same as I used to be. This is my last affair. $50 record cut the vein in her neck. Fool about her money, told her black train wreck. White press Mr. Funeral in the same stacked deck. Can't you see what love and heartache's done to me? I'm not the same as I used to be. This is my last affair. Loved a little blackbird, heard she could sing. Martha in her vineyard, pestle in her spring. Bessie had a bad mouth, made my chimes ring. Can't you see what love and heartache's done to me? I'm not the same as I used to be. This is my last affair. Thank you.